So if they raced to a nuke, they would have one that they could test in the desert, but they couldn't really deliver other than strap it to the back of a flatbed truck or like put it in an airliner or something,
right,
which they couldn't get to Israel and they couldn't use it. And then there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for the 60%. It was to negotiate away.
So recently, Scott Horton was on Tucker Carlson's podcast talking about the truth regarding Iran's nuclear program. Did they have a nuke? Were they just weeks away from a nuke like we were told on the eve of the U.S. bombing campaign? And was it even possible for them to fast-track a nuke? Scott is a friend of mine, and he knows more about the history of the Middle East and the history of U.S.-Iranian relations than basically anyone in the world, and I guarantee what he's going to talk about here is not in any of the prevailing narratives that are being given to Americans right now. So let's check out what he has to say. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
The Ayatollah, W. Bush puts Iran, Iraq, and North Korea in the axis of evil in 2002. And
oh, yeah.
Of all the preposterous lies, Saddam and the Ayatollah are allies when no two men in the world hate each other more than these two, right? And they're allies with Osama bin Laden, who is no friend of the Ayatollah and who Saddam Hussein is obviously deathly afraid of and has nothing to do with whatsoever. And then Kim in North Korea, which he had sold some missiles to Iran, but they got no tight alliance. And I think it's pretty clear that the only reason that they put North Korea in there is because if they had said the axis of evil is Iran, Iraq, and Syria, you might have wondered whether the speech was written in Tel Aviv or not. So they went ahead and threw North Korea in there. That's a whole other interview. I like talking about that one too. But so Saddam Hussein's strategy is to say, here's my 12,000-page dossier on all the weapons I ever had. It's the same stuff his son-in-law Hussein Kamel had given up in 1995. There was nothing else to show. They knew by the end of 95 he'd given up everything. Any weapons left in the country had been declared and had just been left there by the inspectors to rot in the sun. Shelf life expired anyway. They had no nuclear program or any of that stuff. But it just wasn't good enough. They were able to just buffalo us into that war no matter what. The North Koreans, they were bullied. I'll skip the details, but people can read How Bush Pushed North Korea to Nukes by Gordon Prather. It's the last article the great Gordon Prather wrote for us at antiwar.com. It's really great. It explains how they essentially bullied Kim into leaving the treaty and starting to make nukes, which you notice we don't mess with North Korea anymore.
No.
And that's a really good point, too. That tells you a lot about how the U.S. treats countries that don't have nuclear weapons versus the ones that they do, or even the ones that give them up, like Gaddafi, who gave up his nuclear weapons program in the mid-2000s, and he was toppled by the U.S. and NATO. But he's actually right here, Bush, you know, for all the bellicosity of the Bush administration and the neocon experiment gone wrong, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, it did push North Korea, justifiably so, I think, to fast-track a nuke. And guess what's happening right now? Based on the behavior of Israel and the United States, if I'm an Iranian nationalist, I want my country to get nukes right now. If anything, this recent military excursion will convince them of that more than nothing else, because the duplicity of the United States is, you know, right out there in the open now, especially after Trump shredded the JCPOA and decided, hey, I'm not going to negotiate for a new one. But no, instead of doing that, let's just go to war. Let me collaborate with Netanyahu for a new war versus Iran. And we haven't heard the last of it. Scott's right.
Okay.
The Ayatollah in Iran took a different tactic. In fact, I'll go ahead and throw in Libya. Gaddafi didn't have a nuclear program. He just had warehouses full of crates full of junk that he bought from the Pakistanis. He didn't have the men with the know-how to build a nuclear program of any description anyway, but that was enough for him to trade away to Bush for normalization. It was 7 years later that Barack Obama stabbed him in the back, literally lynched him to death.
Stabbed him in the rectum, I think, with a bayonet.
And then shot him in the side of the head on the side of the road. But then the Ayatollah said, look, my books are open. I'm part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I have a safeguards agreement with the IAEA. Hands up, don't shoot. You have no casus belli here. And that has been essentially his strategy this whole time. Now, they made facilities at Natanz and later at Fordo. The War Party says that these were top secret facilities that were only revealed by Israel. That's not true. They did buy junk from AQ Khan, the Pakistani nuclear technology supplier, distributor, but only because America wouldn't let them buy a light water reactor from China. If Bill Clinton had just let the Chinese sell them a light water reactor, which cannot produce weapons fuel as waste, then everything would have been fine then. But they basically drove them to the black market where they got uranium enrichment equipment, and they started enriching uranium at Natanz in 2005. Now, they weren't in violation of the deal because the deal says you have to announce within 6 months before introducing nuclear material in any machines that you're going to do so. And they did that. And they have developed, quite frankly, a latent nuclear deterrent. So that makes them what they call a threshold state, the same as Brazil or Germany or Japan.
Yeah, this is where you enrich uranium above 5%, which is necessary for nuclear power, and, maybe even above 20%, which is, necessary for medical isotopes and certain medical treatments. And you become a deterrent state. You're a threshold state. And that was to negotiate away to the United States under a new JCPOA, which is still technically in force with the other powers involved in it. I think, some of the European powers as well as Russia and China are still part of that. And it didn't break the JCPOA or the NPT for them to enrich uranium to the point that they were. Scott also talked about Gaddafi's program. It has been described as a nuclear weapons program, but he's right. It was really in its infantile stages and, not creating nuclear weapons or anything like that. It was kind of the groundwork that would be necessary for that. That's what Gaddafi gave up.
Meaning they've mastered the fuel cycle. They know how to enrich uranium. They could enrich up to weapons grade. But so let's not fight and we won't have to go that far. So that's essentially what they've had this whole time. The Americans, Washington, D.C., during the W. Bush years, they just lied that there's a secret parallel nuclear program that's really a nuclear weapons program that's going on there too. And the IAEA can't find it, but trust us, it's there. And they never explained it because they couldn't, because they were lying.
Trust us, it's there. Just like the weapons of mass destruction you said Saddam had and at his disposal. Exactly the same concept. The same playbook just played out every single time, this time just within the Bush administration. That's exactly right.
They just heavily implied it all the time. Secret, illicit nuclear weapons program, as though the thing existed, which it never did. And we almost went to war over it a couple of times, but it was stopped in 2007 by the commander of CENTCOM, Admiral Fallon, and then later the CIA. And the National Intelligence Council put out their NIE of November 2007 saying they have not decided to make nuclear weapons. Bush complained in his memoir, W. Bush, that, well, how was I supposed to attack them? He said, oh, I'm so sorry, Your Highness, to the King of Saudi Arabia. I can't attack them because my own intelligence agencies say they're not making nukes. And if they don't have a military program, I can't do anything.
It was also said that the Pentagon squashed that potential war with Iran in 2007 because the U.S. didn't possess regional dominance, like the ability to, dominate Iran, especially after the washed-out Bush administration had gotten bogged down in Afghanistan and Iraq, both of which were 20-plus year occupations. The U.S. still has troops in Iraq today, I think about 1,000 of them. And Dick Cheney still wanted to go to war with Iran in 2007, apparently. But even Dick Cheney had to, be shut down by Bush at that point because of how perilous U.S. foreign policy was and how absurd this idea was that the U.S. would start yet another war, which likely would have ended in occupation. So, yeah, that is a preposterous, kind of aspect of Bush's presidency that doesn't get a lot of coverage, but there really was on the table, apparently, plans for war with Iran. And there certainly was in the 90s. We know that from the Clean Break memo I've talked about several times on this channel as well, but there you go.
So his hands were tied, he thought. And then this was essentially the status quo until Obama comes in and Netanyahu comes in right before Obama does. It comes back to power. And he starts threatening like he's going to attack Iran and drag us into it. At this point, Zbigniew Brzezinski even said, if Netanyahu flies planes over Iraq to attack Iran, Obama should shoot them down over Iraq. So I know Robert Kennedy says Brzezinski was the founder of the neoconservative movement, but no, he was never a neocon, and they hated each other sometimes. They worked together on Russia issues. He was a two-state solution guy and definitely not a Likudnik, and not on Iran especially. Obama was, I think, really worried. And a lot of people were really worried that Netanyahu was going to start the war in his first term and drag him into it. And so the way to prevent that was to create the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the John Kerry nuclear deal.
That was the point of it.
That was the point, was we already have an NPT and we already have a safeguards agreement, but essentially everybody's pretending that they don't exist. The Western media is following the Likud party line that there's essentially nothing stopping Iran from making a nuke right now if we don't hit them. So Obama said, fine, we'll just add another layer of deal on top of that. So,
But the Iran deal was a way to keep Netanyahu from starting a war with Iran and dragging us in.
yes, although
I feel like we're
I think
watching
he
the
was
same
bluffing.
movie.
I don't think Netanyahu really was going to do it back then. I think he did it here because he had Trump's permission. I'm not certain of that. I don't know if you know, but I don't know that it's really clear exactly. But I think at that time he was really just bluffing and was trying to get Obama to do something, at least to roll back their program, if not completely eliminate it.
And I gotta say, Obama was a total disaster in terms of foreign policy. We saw that in Syria and Libya and the drone war in Yemen, expanding that madness. But I have to also say that it was a good idea to get into a JCPOA with Iran at that time. I wish it would have held in the United States longer, because it really did take war off the table with Iran. So whether or not Netanyahu was bluffing back then, whether he really wanted to strike Iran at that point and, create a new war, drag the U.S. into it, or not, it was a good idea to have a JCPOA. And it's just one of the biggest tragedies that the U.S. broke that agreement with Iran, because I don't think this strike on Iran would have been possible. This new war that still exists, there's a ceasefire, right? But we know how Israel breaks ceasefires. Just see what they did in Lebanon and in Gaza recently. So, yeah, Scott's right. This has had bad ramifications.
But so what they did was the JCPOA, Trump called it the worst deal that any men ever signed or whatever. It's just not really true. I mean, what it did was it severely rolled back their nuclear program. So they poured concrete in their Arak, that's ARAK, their Arak heavy water reactor. They severely restricted the number of centrifuges spinning at Natanz by 2/3, I believe it was. They turned the Fordo, or the COM facility, into a research-only facility, no uranium production there. And then the deal is that they wanted to, the American side wanted for Iran to export any stockpile of enriched nuclear material out of the country, so that if they withdrew from the treaty and kicked the inspectors out of the country and started beating their chest and declared, now we're making a bomb, it would take them a year. This is what they call the breakout period. It would take them a year to have enough fissile material to make a single gun type nuke out of.
Yeah, this is true. If you talk to people that study this, experts in the field, it would take, even if you have 90% enriched uranium, by the way, it would probably take anywhere from 6 months to a year to produce a nuclear bomb to actually fire. And you'd then need a delivery system. You'd have to put it on top of a ballistic missile. And they don't have the capability of striking the United States. So Scott is right. This breakout period is something that no one's talking about, because they're only confining the discussion to the enrichment of uranium, which, again, is not enough to build a nuclear weapon. Even if they wanted to fast track a nuke, they couldn't have done it between the time Tulsi Gabbard testified in their annual threat report that Iran hasn't reconstituted their nuclear weapons program, they don't have one, to the time in which Trump struck in late June. It would have been impossible.
And so they wanted to make it that difficult. So they would have to ship out all their uranium to France, and the French would turn it into fuel rods and ship it back, and they would burn that in their heavy water reactor. Now, there's two routes to the nuclear bomb. Forget the H bomb for a minute. We're just talking about fission bombs, atom bombs. The plutonium route, like the Nagasaki bomb, was already precluded, because even though their heavy water reactor produces plutonium waste, it's heavily polluted with other isotopes. And so you need a reprocessing facility to get all that out to make usable fuel. They don't have that reprocessing facility. The Russians had the right to come and get all their waste and take it back to Russia to be diluted down there. So there was no plutonium route to the bomb. Now, the uranium route to the bomb is interesting because, and this is something that you may have been referring to about I make corrections when I'm wrong. I had overstated this on the Piers Morgan show and on Breaking Points last week and 2 weeks ago. And so I was trying to fix that with this statement. And they did let me go back on Breaking Points to address it. That What I had said wrongly was that you can't really make an implosion bomb that you could miniaturize out of uranium. That's not correct. You can. What you can't do is make a gun-type nuke out of plutonium. And I had overstated that. But my point more or less still stands, because my point was that if Iran broke out and raced to a bomb in that 1 year breakout capability, it's virtually like unanimous among the experts that if they wanted to race and get a bomb as fast as they could, it would be a simple gun type nuke like the kind America dropped on Hiroshima, which is essentially a uranium slug fired into a uranium target, and it just causes a supercritical mass there. But to do that, it's too big to miniaturize and fit onto Iran's missiles.
And we got no intelligence up to the point in which this strike happened. Israel struck Iran and then the U.S. joined, that this was even considered or intentioned or, actionable intelligence even presented to the American public. All we got talked about was the uranium enrichment, that they're weeks away. Netanyahu wouldn't even say weeks away, even after Israel bombed Iran, that residential facility, on the first day of the bombing. He said that they're maybe a year away. It didn't come until the United States was about to bomb the 3 facilities, which they did with 30,000-pound bombs, that we heard, America has received intelligence that they're weeks away. We've been receiving that intelligence for 30 years. It's designed to draw the U.S. into war with Iran. So Scott knows much more about the routes you can go to obtain one of these weapons. The plutonium option essentially off the table, but the uranium option, even if fast-tracked, it wouldn't have been possible.
Their nose cones or any of that. So if they raced to a nuke, they would have one that they could test in the desert, but they couldn't really deliver other than strap it to the back of a flatbed truck or like put it in an airliner or something,
right,
which they couldn't get to Israel and they couldn't use it. If they were to even make an implosion bomb with uranium, though, it would take years worth of testing and development to get the implosion system right to make it work. So they couldn't race toward a bomb if they wanted to make a bomb small enough to marry to a missile to be able to deliver to anyone. So in other words, even if they withdrew from the treaty, kicked out the inspectors, and started making nukes, it's very likely that their first nuke or two would be simple, undeliverable gun-type nukes that would be not much more of a deterrent than their latent deterrent. So,
yeah, this whole thing about that there'd be a mushroom cloud above New York City was just garbage. It was designed to be war propaganda. This was not designed to protect the United States. It's designed for the purpose of empire building and adopting the mentality of the Israel lobby and the Israel first creed. And that's that you have to get embroiled in all these Middle Eastern affairs on the part of Israel, just like the U.S. has for almost my entire adult lifetime. In Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, now Iran. This is what they do. This is how they draw the U.S. in, and the military-industrial complex is involved too. The deep state operatives that want that, they're still trying to sell a bag of lies that this protects Americans and that somehow this is for the security of the United States, despite the fact that Iran was trying to negotiate in good faith and can't hit the United States with any delivery system whatsoever. No, this was Israel first. This was MEGA, Make Israel Great Again.
Now, Trump gets out of the deal in 2018 at Netanyahu's behest, and there were problems with the deal. It had sunset provisions in it that said, after a certain period of time, you can increase your number of centrifuges again, and these other things. Now, I believe that if Trump had come in and told Netanyahu to pipe down, in his first term, and had said to the Ayatollah, now listen, I don't like this deal. It was my predecessor's deal, and I want to improve it. Let's get along. We'll take it at face value. I came into office with this agreement. Let's see if we can improve it. Let's see if we can get rid of some of these sunset provisions. Let's see if we can find a way to renegotiate the deal and make it better. He didn't do that. He just withdrew. And in consequence of that, it's actually part of the deal that Iran is allowed to stop abiding by some of the restrictions in the deal and still stay within the deal if America breaks its agreement first. And so they did. They started enriching after Israel murdered their top weapons scientist, Fakhrizadeh, or pardon me, his top nuclear scientist. I don't know that he was a weapons scientist at all. Their top nuclear scientist in December of 20, they started enriching up to 20% again, which is still legitimate. They need 20% enriched uranium-235 for their medical isotope reactors. But then in April, the Israelis did a sabotage mission at Natanz, and they bragged about it. They were the ones who did it. And in reaction to that, the Iranians then started enriching up to 60% uranium-235. Now, you need really above 90% to make an effective uranium atom bomb. It's technically possible to make one with above 80% enriched uranium-235. Mark Dubowitz says you can make one with 60% enriched uranium-235, but I don't think that's really right. But anyway.
So yeah, what he was talking about Trump, what if he had, told Netanyahu to pipe down in his first administration? Like, ideally, I agree with him. The U.S. is the one that funds Israel, but it often seems like Israel's government has much more influence on the United States than the United States government has on Israel. Trump wasn't going to do that. He was busy catering to the Israel lobby in other ways during the time in which Scott was talking about this. And I'm with Scott. That would have been ideal. But Trump was trying to and accomplishing the changing of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, precluding to some extent the possibility of a future Palestinian state, because many of the proponents of that idea want the eastern Jerusalem to be part of that state, and the presence of a U.S. embassy there, at least to some extent, dissuades that potential. And signing the Abraham Accords, which even his Department of Homeland Security said, well, that's really not in the U.S. interest because it's going to inflame tensions with regional powers over there. And this is the part of the deep state telling that to Trump. So it wasn't going to happen. Trump has been in the bag of the Israel lobby. He brags about it. He tells, reporters about how much he catered to Miriam and Sheldon Adelson. He always gives Israel more than they ask. He's open about this. He's literally said, make Israel great again. This is who Trump is.
What's the point of doing it then?
Typically up to 60%. Right. Good question. Because this is what you'll hear all the hawks say. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and all of them say over and over again that, what do they need the 60% for? To negotiate away. That was why. They're trying to get America back in the deal. If they had wanted to race toward weapons-grade uranium, they could have just raced toward weapons-grade uranium and enriched it up to 90%. They're going up to 60 because it makes them closer. It means their breakout time is shorter, and they're trying to put pressure on the Americans to get back into the deal, which we already had and which they are still officially a part of. And so that was why they were going up to 60%.
What do you mean they're still officially a part of it?
They're still officially part because they signed the JCPOA with France and Britain, the United States, Russia, and China, all the members of the permanent members of the UN Security Council. Right. So they're still part of the JCPOA. It still is the law, basically. It's still the international law and their agreement. But as I said, there are subsections of the agreement itself that say that if America stops abiding by our part of it, they can stop abiding by some of the restrictions, even while remaining inside the deal.
And also, Israel, ironically, isn't bound by the NPT. They are not part of the NPT. And there's no IAEA inspections because they won't announce the presence of their secret nuclear weapons program that we know they have. It was the Domina project. It developed in the early 1960s. Kennedy tried to actually put the kibosh on it. There's correspondence showing that he had correspondence with David Ben-Gurion and others in that project to try to shut this down. He ultimately failed. And, he was killed in circumstances that are still murky despite what anyone wants you to say. So that's where we are. And the biggest irony in this whole thing is that Israel maintains a secret nuclear weapons program, and they just struck a country and bombed it because of the suspicion that they had a secret nuclear weapons program, which they didn't have, by the way.
So they were really just, the purpose of the 60% was to try to force America back to the table. And Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was so disingenuous. I saw him give a statement on the Sunday morning news show last week, where I guess on This Week, where he says, the only countries that have 60% uranium have nuclear weapons. Come on, man. That's just obfuscation. If we're making nuclear weapons out of uranium, it's not at 60%, which all ours are plutonium bombs anyway, but he knows what he's doing when he says that, right? He wants you to understand that Iran is racing toward a nuke without actually claiming that because he knows it's really not true. And And then there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for the 60%. It was to negotiate away.
That was a wise decision on Iran's part. If you enrich up to 60%, you're a threshold state. You kind of have a deterrent without actually having a nuclear weapon. I would want to do that to avoid being bombed, by the way. And, you know, for as much as Netanyahu and the United States clamored about wanting to bomb Iran, it wasn't like this was kept in the dark and in secret. Iran knew about the writing on the wall for a long time, going back decades. And guess what? After this bombing escapade and this stupid war, which Trump signed on to placate Netanyahu, they have all the incentive in the world now to fast track a nuke. And I don't think it's possible within a very short time frame based upon everything I'm hearing for people that actually study this and actually are honest about this. And by the way, when I say are honest about this, I don't mean Mossad. I don't mean the CIA on the eve of the bombing changing the intelligence from what Tulsi Gabbard said back in March to, oh yeah, they're weeks away now. And Americans are just supposed to swallow that hook, line, and sinker, the same playbook from 2003 that put our country backwards immeasurably in terms of debt and inflation and ramifications on civil liberties. We got the Patriot Act and the DHS and the PRISM program and surveillance state within the NSA in that time frame because of all this absurd lunacy about terrorism. Well, the real terrorists are our government, our rulers that try to draw us into these wars, and the Israel lobby's part of it. There's many complicit actors in the United States in both major political parties, and there won't be changing of that until we erase this stupid war propaganda and create a new narrative that sheds light on the truth, on veritas, the fact that these schemes are designed to sell wars. They're not designed to protect America. They're designed to sell wars on behalf of the profiteers of those wars, the military-industrial complex, the Israel lobby. And, you know, it's not clear at all that Israel actually profits from this. There's now precedent on how you can penetrate the Iron Dome, strategies to use to kill Israelis. And hey, if I'm an Israeli wrapped up in this, I don't want my government acting bellicose toward Iran. This is insane. And the same thing if I'm an American. There's no sense in this. Bring our troops home, shut down all the bases in the Middle East. And it was criminal for U.S. troops even to be exposed to the possibility of strikes from Iran. That there's 45,000 in that region, the Arabian Peninsula, near the coast of Iran. And we're just supposed to swallow that and be fine with it. Well, no, I'm with Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich and Thomas Massey and Rand Paul and all those who don't want to embrace the Israel first mentality. So Scott was perfectly correct here. I'm so glad to be friends with Scott. He's so knowledgeable about these things. He's essentially a photographic memory about all these things, and he's totally right. The whole Iran nuclear weapon sham is exactly that. We have to call it out as such. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with Scott Horton? What were the ramifications of this war with Iran? Will they linger? Will the U.S. get thrust back into this in the future? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker too. He's great. And consider becoming a YouTube member by hitting the join button below and joining up. That would support the channel, and you get the perk of being able to watch all of my videos before when they come out on YouTube. So until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.